Well, thank you very, very much. What a fantastic welcome. It is fabulous to be with each of you here in Iowa. It is great. Let me say thank you to my friend Steve King for inviting me here. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for everyone coming out in the middle of harvest with football games going on. Thank you instead for being here with a couple of politicians instead. Thank you and God bless you. Let me tell you something about your congressman. There are lots of things you know about him. You know he's principled. You know he speaks the truth. But let me tell you the most important characteristic about Steve King. It's that he is utterly fearless. And that, I promise you, is a very rare commodity on Capitol Hill. I also want to say it's an extraordinary honor to be here at an event named in honor of Colonel Bud Day, a true American hero. Let me say, Chris, what a phenomenal memorial, what a phenomenal tribute you gave moments ago. You know, I have to say it reminded me of on the day that Colonel Day passed. That day we had a Senate lunch with all the Senate Republicans. And John McCain, who served with Bud Day and was imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton with Bud Day, stood up and his voice trembling with emotion, choking, described how in those years of suffering and those years of agony that the POWs all looked to Colonel Bud Day for strength, for inspiration, for resolute courage. And I got to tell you, there was not a dry eye in the room when John McCain finished talking about his friend, Colonel Bud Day. What a privilege to be here at an event in his honor. I'm very sorry I couldn't be at the event when Colonel Day was standing here with a shotgun shooting pheasants himself. You know, we began this morning, a number of us, hunting. Fantastic hunt, beautiful morning, lots of birds. I have to say it was a typical hunt. There were some great shots, whole lot of misses. There are some birds we scared the living daylights out of. I mean, they're going to be in therapy for years. And about a dozen Dick Cheney jokes. You know, we all remember a few years ago when Dick Cheney was down in Texas, shot poor Harry Whittington. Harry Whittington is a friend. He's a lawyer in Austin. Very good man. You know, what a lot of people don't know about that tragic hunting accident is in the 2 weeks that followed, there were over 200 calls to Texas Parks and Wildlife asking how much for a license to shoot a Republican lawyer. So I'm glad Iowa doesn't sell those particular licenses. You know, Steve also talked about humility and how a wife is fantastic for humility. And my wife Heidi was here last night. She had to fly back to be with the girls today. But as good as a wife is for humility, I think children amplify that even more. You know, just last weekend, Heidi and the girls, we have 2 girls. Caroline is 5, Catherine is 2. Caroline is a rascal. And Catherine is the essence of sweetness. In fact, I'm going to run out in about a half hour because I've got to fly back because tomorrow is Catherine's 3rd birthday. And so we're having a princess party. So I'm going to be surrounded by an awful lot of pink. It's actually sort of like serving in the Senate. But last weekend, Heidi and the girls were in D.C., and or 2 weekends ago, and we took a trip to Mount Vernon. It's a great day, went down to Mount Vernon, and we're driving along, and Caroline and Catherine in the back seat. And Caroline asked her little sister, she says, "Catherine, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And Catherine says, "I want to work in the U.S. Senate. I want to work with Daddy." And Caroline goes, "Catherine, That's boring. We're going to be in a rock band. And then Caroline tossed out the zinger. She said, besides, Daddy will be dead by then. It's a real conversation. I'm not making this up. I'm sitting here driving, listening to this whole thing. I have to admit, I wondered if Caroline had been speaking to Republican leadership. If she knew something I didn't know. You know, we all know we are in extraordinary times. The challenges facing this country are not typical. They're not ordinary. We're facing fiscal and economic challenges. We're facing an assault on our constitutional rights, unlike anything this country's ever seen. So how do we turn things around? I'm going to suggest to you two things that we need to do to turn things around. And if you remember nothing that I've said today, then somebody probably spiked the iced tea. But if you remember one thing that I said today, let it be this, that I am profoundly optimistic that despite all of the challenges in this country, I am convinced we are going to turn this country around. Two things we need to do that. Number one, champion growth and opportunity. And number two, empower the people. In the last 4 years, our economy has grown, on average, 0.9% a year. You know, there's only one other period since World War II of 4 consecutive years of less than 1% average growth. That was 1979 to 1982. That was coming out of the Jimmy Carter administration. It was the same failed economic policies, out of control spending, out of control taxes, out of control regulation. And it produced the exact same economic stagnation. I can tell you every day I've been in the U.S. Senate, my number one priority has been focused on one thing: restoring economic growth. You know, it's interesting. Our friends in the media wonder, why is it that Congress is held in such low regard? Well, when you spend a little bit of time traveling, whether it is traveling the state of Texas, my home state, or traveling the country, you very quickly understand why it is. We've done over 75 town halls events all throughout the state of Texas. You know, it doesn't matter in Texas whether you're in East Texas, West Texas, the Panhandle, or down in the Rio Grande Valley. When you ask Texans, what is your top priority? The answer is overwhelmingly jobs and economic growth. Nothing else comes close, and that's true all across this country. Doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. Doesn't matter if you're talking to Republicans, independents, or Democrats. You get the same answer: jobs and economic growth is the top priority. I got to tell you, in the 10 months I've served in the U.S. Senate, we have spent virtually zero time even talking about jobs or economic growth. It simply isn't a priority in Harry Reid's U.S. Senate. We spent 6 weeks talking about guns and taking away people's Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And no time talking about fundamental tax reform, about regulatory reform, about stopping the burdens from Washington that are strangling small businesses and killing jobs all over this country. And growth is foundational to every other challenge we've got. You look at every other priority, whether it's unemployment, whether it's our national debt, whether it's maintaining the strongest military in the world to protect our national security. With growth, we can do all of that. Without growth, we can't do any of it. The problems are insoluble without economic growth. So how do you get growth? Well, you know, it's not that complicated. Cause and effect is a principle that those in Washington have a difficult time understanding. But, you know, President Obama is fond of saying he inherited the worst economy in the history of the universe. It seems when he says that, he doesn't have a whole lot of historical memory. Any of y'all in this room remember the late 1970s? You remember double-digit unemployment, 22% interest rates, gas lines going around the block, stagflation? That wasn't a compliment. Our hostages languishing in Iran for 444 days while the President of the United States wrung his hands, unsure of what to do. And yet, in 1980, a very, very different president was elected. When Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, he implemented policies the exact opposite of Barack Obama's. Instead of jacking up taxes on everybody, $1.7 trillion is what Barack Obama has raised taxes. President Reagan cut taxes and dramatically simplified the tax code. Instead of exploding spending in the national debt, Reagan restrained the growth of spending. And instead of unleashing regulators like locusts to devour small businesses, Reagan pulled back regulation. And the result was some of the most incredible economic growth this country's ever seen. The fourth year of Reagan's presidency was 1984. Anyone know what economic growth was in 1984? 7.2%. Let's put that in real terms. If President Obama, coming into office, inheriting the same lousy economy that Ronald Reagan inherited, had implemented the same economic policies Ronald Reagan implemented, and if it had produced the same economic growth, by today, we would have an additional 7 million new jobs. That is the equivalent of taking every single person who is unemployed in 46 of the 50 states and finding a new job for each and every one of them. That's how important growth is. And by the way, growth is, if you look at our deficit, if you look at our debt, growth dwarfs everything else in terms of our ability to turn around our debt. You know, a 1% increase in GDP growth over a decade produces $2.8 trillion in additional tax revenue. $3.1 trillion in paying down the deficit and the debt. 1 stinking percent. That's a technical term, stinking percent. As Republicans, we need to focus on growth over and over and over again. Every Republican ought to have the word growth tattooed on his or her hands. And let me tell you the reason growth matters so much. Growth is foundational to opportunity. For a long time, I've advocated what I call opportunity conservatism, which is that every policy we think about, we talk about, should focus like a laser on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder, on how it impacts the least off among us, how it impacts those who are struggling to achieve the American dream. Because let me tell you all right now, the single biggest lie in politics. It is that Republicans are the party of the rich. What complete nonsense. Do you know under President Obama, the top 1%, those millionaires and billionaires that the president loves to demagogue, the top 1% are currently earning the highest percentage of our national income since 1928. Listen, when the government expands its control of the economy, the rich do fine. 5 years ago, if you had a private jet, you're still flying a private jet. Who are the losers? Who are the people who are getting hammered by the Obama economy? It's the most vulnerable among us. It's the young people, it's Hispanics, it's African Americans, it's single moms. They're the ones who are getting laid off. They're the ones who aren't getting hired. They're the ones who are paying the price for Obamacare. It's all the young people coming out of school who can't find jobs because of Obamacare. It's all the single moms, all the African American teenagers who are finding their hours forcibly reduced to 29 hours a week because of Obamacare. You can't feed your kids on 29 hours a week. African American teenage unemployment on President Obama is over 35%. It's all of the struggling families who are working to provide for their kids, who are right now getting notifications in the mail that their health insurance premiums are going up 50%, 100%, 200%. It's all the seniors, all the people with disabilities who are right now getting notification in the mail that their health insurance has been canceled because of Obamacare. Everything we think about, we talk about, should be focused not on the giant corporations. You know what? They do just fine. Here's one of the best definitions of the difference between Reaganomics